Welcome to Reed's Spider-Man Crawl Space Edition. Please check us out at the SpidermanCrawlspaces.com. Well, here I am, everyone. This is it, the big issue 875, the conclusion to Nick Spencer's run on The Amazing Spider-Man with a whole slew of artists and a little bit of co-writing from Christopher Gage. So, did the issue live to the hype? Did Nick Spencer stick the landing? Are all your questions answered? Well, let's get into the pros. First of all, it does pick up right away. You really like the way the story comes together with not only Spider-Man going in and everything, but also watching as Mephisto and Doctor Strange are watching from the sidelines as they're taking their bet to see if Spider-Man can actually overcome the adversities to actually free Harry Osborn's soul. And it's really amazing because you see the battle as well as all the different pieces that are thrown out. And of course, it's a great scene when we have Harry Osborn, aka Harry Lyman, the clone, as we find out, actually jump in with the whole Green Goblin gear and him actually explain some of the storylines and everything to Carly about actually fitting in some of those holes that had happened with Harry towards the end of Dan Slott's run and some of the other pieces that happened since Brand New Day. And it's really nice because it's a nice little team up and it actually shows the friendship and actually everything them going against Kindred, who of course are the Stacy twins, who are just clones themselves, being directed by Mephisto, and the fact that this was always been done since Norman sold, Harry's soul for all the power and that, and of course all the dominoes fell. So it's really nice there, as well as the fact that Mephisto in One More Day was actually all planned. It wasn't just say, well, I'll give you this. Of course, we all know Mephisto always has a different thing. After all, he is the Marvel Universe's version of the devil, even though there's several different areas of demonic hell in the Marvel Universe. But the fact that it actually was always motivated for what it is, and the fact that he needed Peter and Mary Jane apart to avoid them ever having a child that would eventually defeat him in his big Hell on Earth storyline, which has been talked about for many, many moons, and the fact that Spider-Man will be his direct defeat. And it's nice to actually get some conclusion, as well as Harry going out in a bang, defeating, and actually Norman coming to terms with everything about how he destroyed his own family, how he had everything and he gave it all up for power and money and a bad deal, which of course led him on that walk to being the Green Goblin. So all that's really nicely well done. And of course the ending with everything being defeated, to the fact that Mary Jane's the other champion, their love between Peter and Mary Jane eventually overcomes Kindred, and the fact that they are actually defeated. Harry Osborn's soul is released, of course, at the cost of Harry's life again, and all these other confessions. So it's really nice on that, how that's done, but that kind of leads us to the cons. After everything that's happened, both Mary Jane and Peter technically don't know about the deal that happened One More Day, though of course at the same time it just feels like the last 3 years of Spider-Man has been Nick Spencer trying to clean everything up of all the craziness happened since One More Day, from all the mischaracterization, the thrown out thing, the bad guys being brought back to life and then not having any motivation, the fact that they actually put them back in for the reasons why they died, like Kraven the Hunter, and of course Harry Osborn, even dealing with a little talk about how Kirk Connors finally gets what his wishes and actually separates the Lizard and some other pieces, but of course it leaves a lot of holes. You don't really know what is actually Nick Spencer's full piece and what was his plan for all of his storylines, even though he did his best to try to piece them all together. But there's so many questions. I mean, now that Fred Myers is dead, Boomerang, there really is no aftermath of that outside a couple of moments and everything between Peter and the fact that Fred died. We don't see the Sinister Six. What about Randy Robertson? His roommate that he liked better is dead. What about Janice Lincoln feeling guilt about everything they did and drove him out? There's so much of this. Also, there's another thing. Dr. Octopus really doesn't get the questions answered himself. Also, everything with Kindred, after all this buildup, all the fact that it was actually Harry, it turned out to be the Stacy twins, who of course are robotic clones that were done by the Harry AI from way back of, the Lost Years, as well as the fake Peter Parker parents, which of course in the long run, who's the villain behind all this? Mephisto himself. So it kind of leads to all this, and we don't really get a lot of conclusion with everything else too. Why it brings those storylines, there's also even questions. Is now Norman officially cleansed of his sins and no longer be the Green Goblin? What happened with the other storylines with that? Peter's job, graduate work, that's all kind of left over. The Clairvoyant and the Chameleon's main plan with the Finisher is never really explained either. That's all left over too. And here's another thing. What happens to Aunt May? Aunt May isn't even in this storyline. So what was that point? And also, I mean, why the artists are great, from everyone for Carlos to Mark Bagley, and I think did a really good job at all the multiple, including Patrick Gleason and a few other artists on this book. It keeps the story flowing, but when this is all said and done, it feels like you're not quite sure where the storyline ended with Nick Spencer's original storyline and what might have possibly in the editorial mandate and leading here to Spider-Man Beyond. With all of that said, everybody, I'm actually going to give the issue a B+. I thought it had a really nice conclusion and really kind of set things back to where they're supposed to be and what's been happening for the last 30 to 40 years of Spider-Man that was kind of undone in the last 15 years. So it feels nice, but I feel like Nick Spencer was kind of came in and tried to do his best to bring everything back to conclusion, to a status quo for the next writer, but he took some toys away, like, Boomerang as well as Thing. We also don't know what happened to God. We don't know really what's going to happen with the Sinister Syndicate going forward. Not to mention, everything with the Foreigner and Silver Sable. He doesn't know she actually took all his money back. He still blames Spider-Man. So at the same time, those are more storylines that don't subdue. It doesn't feel like there's some storylines that needed conclusions that weren't talked. The great thing on all of this is the fact that no matter what, Mephisto is going to eventually meet his own demise because Peter and Mary Jane are together. They will survive all this at some point in the future. So that has all been taken care of. And it kind of feels like it's an acknowledgement, even though it's not an undoing of one more day or anything. But it does feel like the storylines kind of intersect to where we can get Peter and Mary Jane right now to the sunset, Spider-Man Beyond's coming up. But altogether, I have to say I'm going to give Nick Spencer's run an A-. There were a lot of holes from a lot of storylines from, of course, the Chameleon Conspiracy, 2099, and a few other things, as well as storylines that never really got concluded the way I think Nick Spencer wanted to do, as well as, like I said, taking Boomerang away after he spent so many years on him in Superior Foes, of course, Secret Empire, and now here we're just running Amazing Spider-Man, only for, Fred to die the hero, but we don't really get any much more beyond that. So it was a really, really large size issue. So it gets a B+ for me and A- for the run. The backup stories are kind of nice. I like the little history of Spider-Man from beginning to current ones is kind of nice. It talks about the Clone Saga, Gwen, the black costume. It's a fun little story. I do like the backup storyline with art by Todd Knack about one of former friends of Uncle Ben, who, of course, turned to alcoholism and abuse, and how much about his life was just a complete craze, but also bringing in the emphasis of how May and Ben Parker really were for people. They were very kind people that, gave so much of themselves, their money, their supplies, not expect anything, from them, but as it revealed, it kind of hurt them in the ways of poverty-wise, as well as trying to have that kind of better life for Peter, and they always struggle because they always put others' needs ahead of others. It's a fun little story. I like that Peter kind of comes with everything with them and when the storyline is over, so it's a nice little piece. As for the little Spider-Man Beyond, with a certain other redhead, Tyne, that's been brought back, it's a nice little setup, a little bit more, and teases about what's going on with Spider-Man Beyond, but we really don't know what the storyline is going to be until next week, when, of course, issue 75, Amazing Spider-Man of Spider-Man Beyond, kicks off. So we kind of get our teasers for it, but at the same time, it feels like this chapter of Spider-Man has come to a close, and now we're just going to have to see what happens with Spider-Man Beyond. And yes, I will be here for all your thrice monthly issues for Spider-Man Beyond. That will hopefully be released either the day of or the day after of those reviews. So that's my little promise to everybody. But unfortunately, we all know life happens. So there it is, everybody. Nick Spencer run comes to a conclusion. Not quite a stick of a landing, more of a little bit of a stumble, but not too bad. So you know what? It was a great run by this writer and the slew of artists from Ryan Ottley all the way to Patrick Gleason. Thank you guys everywhere, wherever you can hear me if you're watching this review. You guys did a fantastic job. You brought a Spider-Man reader back to the book after over a decade of not wanting to really be a part of it and actually giving up comics to the point I sold my entire collections for several times. So you know what, Nick and everyone else, Ryan, Pat, Carlos, everyone, thank you so much for what you did with Spider-Man these last couple years. You really made me bring back to the books, as well as so many other readers that really enjoy it. I know it wasn't always a grade A, and it was always, as they say, a walk through the park, but what you did for Spider-Man right now, I think, has been fantastic. So thank you, gentlemen and ladies, for everything you did for this book series, and I look forward to see what the future holds for Amazing Spider-Man. I'm going to cross my fingers for Spider-Man Beyond, and of course I will be here, of course, on the SpidermanCrawlspace.com, as well as everything else from Discord to our podcast, so please check us out on your social medias, as well as your little discussions, everything. And on that note, everybody, after a long, long run for the last couple years, I would have bid everybody adieu on Nick Spencer's run of Amazing Spider-Man for this 43-year-old reader. Thank you again, and I'll see everybody later on the Crawl Space.